Disclaimer. Years back, I watched a bit of the anime, and I thought it was pretty good, but I didn't feel compelled to see it through. I don't have a huge boner for Japan, but given how much of my childhood was spent watching Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z, I'm probably slightly more moved than some by the "what you lack is the power of friendship" kind of shit that these things pull. I also own 3 body pillows. The story of One Piece follows a charismatic, elastic teenager who wishes to be a pirate. Not one of those nasty, amoral, selfish scallywags, but rather the captain of a friend boat. Through his unwavering optimism and self-belief, he assembles his crew one member at a time, and each crew member has their own distinct personality, backstory and goals. The story is set pretty much up to date with the series, but revolves around a new non-canon arc, and all 9 crew members are available either from the offset or near enough. The basis of the story is that a new enemy is searching for something that will make him super strong, and that will result in him becoming the Pirate King, a goal that's in conflict with our protagonist. New areas are springing up like magic within a small island, and all you can do to try and make sense of things is to bash your head against a multitude of enemies that wait for you in each zone. This always culminates in fighting a boss and learning a bit more about what's happening. The plot isn't deep, but it doesn't really need to be. As the big bad has the ability to conjure areas and clones of anyone he chooses, it's just a vehicle to rehash old fights from the series. My cynical side tells me that the clone concept is an incredibly low effort way of recycling tried and tested characters and storylines, but I think that the target audience for the game has to be assumed to be fans of the series, and what the game offers is a way to relive and control some of the most exciting moments. The dialogue is well done and plentiful. The characters regularly chime in, which prevents you getting too worn down by the thumping and crashing of combat. If there's one thing that makes One Piece stand out from other mainstream anime, it's the characters. It uses character archetypes that everyone can jive with, like the horny one, the cute one, and that samurai guy, all of whom feel worthwhile and individual. The horny one is also the ship's chef, the cute one can turn into a pretty muscular deer or something, and the samurai guy wears green. There's also a campy skeleton bard. It's just good, okay? All of the voice acting is in Japanese with subtitles, which was good. I don't mind reading, and despite the fact that I didn't understand what they were saying, the delivery of the lines was great and didn't obscure any tells about intentions. The script only seemed like it had been run through a translating program on a few occasions. I mean, what is this? Reneging? It's not a Wii U exclusive. It's out on PS3 looking pretty much identical, and there are handheld versions too. You can play the game in 480p on the gamepad, but they also missed the most obvious quality of life feature, which was just to put the map on the bloody gamepad when you're playing on the TV. It was annoying bringing up the map to check my orientation when I'd found myself turned around in a pretty generic looking location. They just needed to make it viewable in real time on the gamepad. The maps are really linear, and occasionally involve different levels, but there's no true platforming to speak of. It's one of those types where if you fall into the water, you get teleported back up to solid land but with a bit less health. This means that the gameplay is navigating very linear corridors, each with their own scenery flavour and fighting scripted mobs. When I describe it like this, it sounds really boring and unoriginal, and the combat kind of is, but on the normal difficulty it's not bad, and on New Game Plus it kind of dragged for me. Scattered throughout the world are points that can be interacted with when you're controlling the right character, sometimes requiring you to have reached an arbitrary point in the story too. Presumably this was for balance, and it would have been kind of okay and more understandable if the game wasn't as easy as it is. I can't see why anyone would do these backtrack events on a first playthrough, because what makes the game enjoyable isn't so much the stage, but rather taking in the scenery whilst you whiz past trying to get to the boss, where you get some decent dialogue, in-game cutscenes and hopefully a fun fight. Usually the treasures are underwhelming and you don't need to get them at all, it's easy enough as it is. To make the maps more involving, there are a number of plants and animals for you to kick and catch respectively. Collectibles like herbs and wood are used to make items and upgrade the town, and you give all of the animals to a man who puts them in a museum a la Animal Crossing. All of these things are pretty fun, but they all suffer from one big problem, which I'll get to later. On every mission you choose 3 characters to take, though all relevant characters will be present in all cutscenes, and occasionally the choice is taken out of your hand for one-on-ones, which are actually some of the better fights because the boss's attack and dodge conditions were much less lazy. You get power words or something, which are basically your in-combat specials that act as high-impact attacks which have a brief animation and require a resource built up by punching and kicking people. They help to make the combat better, or faster, which is more often than not a good thing. Speaking of the combat, you have 4 buttons, 2 hitting ones, a jump and a dodge button. The dodge button works kind of like the recent Batman games. You get a prompt which has a time window. This means that unless you get caught mid-combo, you can always be mashing it for a get out of jail free effect. It really cheapens the combat once you learn how easily abused it is. It's also fully functional against the majority of boss moves, though sometimes the game opts for making you run and jump, which felt so much better, and I wish that they'd done this more. The dodge button could have been okay, but the way it's implemented is sloppy. In a boss fight, you're offered a dodge every time an attack might hit you. In dodging this way, rather than moving manually, you leave yourself with a smaller time window to retaliate. The game doesn't make this immediately obvious though. There are a mixture of attacks that can and can't be dodged. If you learn all of the boss's moves and how they work, you can fight a boss quite gracefully, but you don't have to do this at all to progress. This means that to get the most out of boss fights, you have to play them multiple times, despite the fact that they're so easy to cheese through. Each crew member plays differently. Some do slow hits with high damage, some focus on area of effects and status effects, the sniper dude snipes and the cyborg makes turrets that others can get into. But my experience was that the combat felt like it was built much more around the kick-punching characters. Given how enemies flocked to your character, the sniping was pretty balls and did bugger all damage, and the turrets were just unwieldy. A list of moves appears during combat on the right hand side of the screen. If you do all of the combos, there's a break rush where you get stronger, I think. I didn't really notice it making any impact, but it did make me use more moves, which I was grateful for. I realised quickly that the game wasn't so much about any given part of its experience in isolation. By mixing the town stuff, fishing, bug catching, brutalising Mother Nature until she gives you big wood rather than wood block, alongside the exploration and generally adequate combat, plus the decent boss fights and truly enjoyable characters, I started really getting into the game. It's big. I bought a factory, upgraded that shit, I got myself a new fishing rod. I upgraded my bug catching net to be better at catching rats and hellish hypodermic needle wasps, and oh man, I'm really getting into... Hang on. It's over? The game has 8 chapters in total, and it does tell you when you're entering the final one, and it does let you keep playing after you've beaten it on either normal mode or New Game Plus. But fucking brr! In what I consider to be a smelling the roses approach, where I bothered to upgrade things and go catch some bugs for my museum, and get some treasures requiring specific crew members on past levels, it all amounted to nothing. The game expects you to play it again, or to be happy with half doing a bunch of menial tasks. I don't get what they intended the average player to do. It doesn't warn you that you'll need to play the game again, or just spend a disproportionate amount of time on the little tasks when there's actually fun story mode and combat to experience. The game is fun, and it took me at a leisurely pace only about 8 hours to complete the story, which based on how much of the time I spent exploring areas with scripted enemy spawns that are literally just 5 basics and 1 heavy appear from nowhere, it can have been that taxing to create content for. I was pretty happy to go back for more, but don't make me go back for it just to feel like I didn't totally waste my time half completing One Piece Crossing. New Game Plus allows you to ramp up the difficulty and keep playing whilst retaining all of your town progress, meaning that the second playthrough was just going through the chapters again with more difficult combat, and in some cases mini-bosses that should have been there on the first playthrough. They just went about it all wrong. I think it says something that to avoid feeling like you're grinding a given task, you'll need to play through the story twice. It's a pretty clear admission on the part of the developers that they didn't make the fundamental combat and platforming that robust. It doesn't make sense how they pace the minigames and progression in non-story things alongside the story. There are so many stupid choices that went into making this game less enjoyable. The minigames for fishing and bug catching are really good, though once you actually spend any time pushing towards catching bigger animals, you realise that they managed to fuck it up by making it much less about skill and much more about how upgraded your kit is. You can nail the Dance Dance Revolution-esque stream of inputs to catch that little fishy, but if you aren't the right rank, you'll be chipping away a stupidly small amount of energy, and there'll be absolutely zero chance of you actually catching it. This means that you'll sit there for the length of the catch twiddling your thumbs because there's nothing you can do, and you'll know if a fish or bug can be caught within the first few seconds. You can't back out, which means you just spend more time than you should have locked into a broken task. The bug catching is less offensive, but it's the same thing. Resource gathering requires luck or backtracking, as some of the materials can only be farmed with the right character. But in general, just kicking everything that isn't floor and wall will result in most of the town upgrades being achievable. The town shop also mitigates your need to do this because all of your cash can be spent on resources. Healing items on a first playthrough are like climbing into a mech suit to wrestle a baby. If I had to describe the game in 2 words, which I don't but I've chosen to, the words I decide to choose are blue balls. Huge blue balls, and a feeling in my tummy of being both happy and annoyed. The game is charming, the characters are likeable, and some of the set pieces are great. Japanese games seem to really like recycling content, and I'm not making a haha Nintendo joke here. I mean games like Monster Hunter and other RPG ones, which this game is kind of dipping its toe awkwardly into with the almost completely pointless leveling system. You'd think going into it that you should choose 3 to stick with, or try to level them all equally, but I'm pleased to announce that it just doesn't matter. Do what you want, enjoy the game, and don't let it trick you into thinking that any of your decisions matter, or that any of the tasks will have a satisfying conclusion. The good news is that you can pick and choose what's fun for you. I really can't recommend going after any of the tasks that aren't immediately enjoyable. It just won't be worth it. I still really enjoyed my playthrough, and it says something that my only concern going through it was that the little tasks and town building would end up feeling irrelevant or lack any true purpose or depth. Sadly, those concerns proved to be the reality of things. My heart even swelled up while Stretchman looked his more muscular and intimidating enemies in the face and told them that they were boned because he had the power of friendship. I enjoyed meeting bad guys like Street Shark and Ladder Nose, and the ending was good and gave me a warm fuzzy feeling. I was barely offended by the comically large breasts of both of the female crew members. This game came so close to being something I could recommend at about 50% of the RRP, but instead I'd say pick it up at about 75% off if you want to fly through the story mode of a moderately competent beat 'em up. Oh, and the Colosseum mode is fun enough. It has an almost non-existent plot involving the current boss type guy of the series. The fighting is more fun than playing the stages of the main game, but it contains a bitchy, lol, do it again system to lazily pad it out, which is loosely justified as the kind of sadistic shit this bad guy would totally do. Overall, the game doesn't feel like a cynical cash-in. It's got a lot of heart, but at the same time it's hard not to feel scorned with how many things it offers that are all underdeveloped. To summarise, I can't recommend the game for anyone who isn't the kind of person who already decided they were going to buy it because of fandom as soon as they'd seen it. However, if the game drops in price a reasonable amount, there are worse ways to spend a few evenings, especially if you are a fan. Just please don't go spend £40 or $60 or whatever it is on this game. It just isn't worth it. Hellish hypodermic needle wasps, needle wasps, needle...